So we have so far talked about how to research what the employer wants and how to evidence the skills, the education, and the experience that you have. Now we are going on to the third part of our conversation this evening, which is about how do you make sure your candidature stands out among the sea of applicants for any particular opportunity. Basically, this is about how do you communicate in such a way that the employer is going to be interested in your candidature, is going to be able to take notice of, and is going to be able to use the information you have provided to decide whether or not to take your application to the interview stage. So basically, what we have here right now is about communicating your strengths effectively. The typical CV layout and sections have been outlined in this slide. Basically, it's going to be reverse chronological order, which means your most recent experience comes first, your most recent education comes first. In addition to this, and we've got lots of examples that we might be discussing later on. I'm going to be putting this more into perspective with examples. You also have to have your personal details there. Very important details are often left out sometimes. You'll be surprised at how many recruiters get applications from applicants and find that there's no contact address, there's no email that you can reach out to them. You don't want to You want to make sure that if your application gets to the interview stage, a recruiter is able to contact you. Aside from the personal details, you also have to put something like a brief summary, which is known like a profile or an objective, which says a bit about you, maybe 2 or 3 lines just to summarize your strong points and what you think you can offer, which is like a headliner so that the recruiter just looks through and is able to make a decision immediately whether to move on to look through the rest of your application or not. As a student, your most recent experience is usually your education. So most people with least experience usually highlight their education first. And in which case you want to talk about the course you studied, the year you finished, and maybe also highlight some key modules that you took. Emphasis on key modules. You also want to talk about your more experienced people tend to put their work experience first, because like if you have been working, you can imagine having worked for the last 15 years, you probably have not been in school since the last 15 years, so you don't want to emphasize education, rather you are more emphasizing your skills and your experience over the last 15 years, and so you have to put that first. Usually your work experience, you can break it down into different sections if you want to highlight based on experiences under volunteering, or you want to talk about what you did in different industries. If, for instance, like you have consulted for international organizations and this time around you are applying to an international organization field, you may want to emphasize that by putting your international consultancies and short-term contracts under one heading. So you actually can highlight different aspects of your work experience. Positions of responsibilities. A number of us have worked, undertaken roles in different campus-based organizations, state associations, community development clubs. All these positions of responsibility you have held can actually find a place on your CV, highlighting your leadership skills. Obviously, skills in the 21st century, skills are very, very important. IT skills, how many languages can you speak? You also want to highlight your interests, your hobbies, especially if those interests and hobbies align with the organizational goals. You One very key aspect also are your references. References are very important. If references are asked for, you are better off putting it on your CV. But in case the recruiter or employer doesn't specifically ask for your references, you would want to put it down and say references are available upon request. Having said that, it is very good to reach out to your references and make sure that your references are often on standby. You don't want to leave it to the last minute before you start informing somebody that he might be contacted by a recruiter as a referee for you. So I put in here some frequently asked questions. Um, Most students want to know whether one-page CV or two-page CV. Most times, the norm is usually a two-page CV, especially in the UK here and in some countries like Nigeria. It's basically like the norm is a two-page CV, except in some industries like banking or the finance sector, where if you are still under a few years, they usually specifically ask for a one-page CV. So you would want to find out exactly what industry are you applying for and what are the norms in such industry. Some people also ask whether they should be a title or not a title. It depends on how much space you have, because of course, if you are applying to a recruiter already knows that what you are submitting is a CV, so you don't necessarily need to have somewhere that you write curriculum vitae down there. But if you have some space, you can still put it there. Some people ask whether profile or an objective. Usually, a profile which summarizes what you have done is enough, like 2 or 3 lines, because when you say objective, objectives might differ depending on the job you are applying to. But in any case, it's open to your discretion. Photos, no photos, please. In Nigeria, in the United Kingdom, and in most countries, photos are not asked for because they want to make a decision blindly on your application. But you will find out that there are some specific countries, especially European countries, and some specific formats like the Europass CV format that specifically asks for your photograph. In that case, if your photograph is specifically asked for, you would do well to put it. Date of birth, marital status. Generally, it is the norm across the world to avoid putting some information that can disadvantage you, like your date of birth or your marital status, except the employer specifically asks for it. State, the same goes for your state, your local government, your nationality. If it is not specifically asked for, those information are personal details that you would do well to remove or take out of your CV so that it would not encourage discrimination, because somebody else can discriminate against you on the basis of your age, if except if they say if you are not of this age, please do not apply. So in that case, you know that you should not be applying, and you know that they are asking specifically for your age. So, but of course, in Nigeria, these things still differ depending on where you are applying for. So please, it's good to find out what the people want and then do exactly what they want. So basically, the general idea of a CV is for you to communicate impact, and this is where it is important to use words that show what you have achieved. Like, did you set up something? Did you found an initiative like the Youth Emerge initiative? Did you help to reorganize some company processes? When you volunteered for this NGO, how did you simplify processes? How did you eliminate challenges? How did you improve existing activities? And then it's very, very important to quantify your results. You can say we trained 500 students on Microsoft Excel and graphic design, and these students went ahead to achieve so and so. So you need to stress your personal involvement, even though most of these things you can't achieve them alone. You have to work with a team. So you have to state it that you worked with a team, but emphasize your personal involvement in achieving this, because mind you, the recruiter is not going to employ your team. The recruiter is looking to employ you. So you have to tell them what you are bringing to the firm. And then, of course, use recent examples if possible. If you have got a recent example that demonstrates what you do or what you have done, it's better off using that than using an experience of long time ago, like 10 years ago, when you have an experience of last year. So I just wanted to add here an example of of somebody's CV. Like I said, I'm just giving bits and pieces of the CV. This is not the whole CV. So this is an experience somebody is trying to highlight. His name is let's assume his name is Ben. Ben worked as a waiting staff in Cubana restaurant and bar between 2003 August to July 2015. So the first time Ben wrote his CV, this was how it looked. He said he was serving customers, clearing tables, handling cash, and doing occasional bar duties. But of course, if you consider all this that Ben has written here, Ben has gotten a whole range of experiences, but he probably did not communicate it properly. Then now compare that to this next slide that says Ben worked as part of a team in a busy restaurant, serving over 300 customers every evening. He helped to train and support new staff. You can see that here Ben is quantifying his impact by talking about the number of customers he had to deal with every evening and how he was able to help the restaurant in capacity development and training by training and supporting new staff. Ben also has included his excellent customer service skills and attention to detail. So now you don't when we say skills, you find some CVs where when people write their key skills and they list it out. This approach is actually not really preferable, because if you try to do this, there's no evidence that you actually have those skills. But if you have told the recruiter that you used your excellent customer service skills and attention to detail to ensure that orders are well taken, properly delivered quickly and accurately, and you even got an award for it, it says a lot. It shows evidence of what you did. Because if you have ever been in a busy restaurant environment, you can imagine how much attention to detail you need to achieve what you need to achieve there. Also, it shows that Ben also highlighted his flexibility in work. He worked flexibly as required between bar and restaurant to ensure high service standards were maintained at peak periods. So you can imagine how at a peak period of a Friday evening, how busy a restaurant and bar would be in the city of Abuja or Manchester. And so, so this is a typical example of how you can communicate impact, communicate it creatively and engagingly, rather than you don't have to lie about what you did. You just have to put it in proper perspective to emphasize your strong points and to make yourself a formidable candidate. This is the basic principle of every CV.